Barac UK. I'm their women's officer, and I'm going to actually start off with not apologising for discussing at the beginning of my talk in this workshop about looking at where we are now in relation to where black women are now in society under the cuts. And it may have been covered a bit in the beginning of the plenary, so I apologise, I wasn't actually here for that, but I do really want to reiterate some of the points about how we reach out into communities and look at where people are, because I think it's really important to make sure that our anti-cuts movements are diverse and involve everyone. The condemned government cuts that we're facing against our jobs, welfare, public services are hitting the most vulnerable in society. And people have heard from the Disabled People Against the Cuts and other campaign groups some of the vicious attacks this government has launched against people. And we talk about our young people, we talk about the fact that EMA has been cut, tripling the tuition fees, but also I want to talk about the disproportionate effect the cuts are having on black people in society who are facing these cuts. At the beginning of the cuts, actually facing these cuts from a situation already where they're disadvantaged in the most poorest areas of our societies, on the lowest paid jobs anyway, in the most vulnerable jobs, part-time, temporary jobs, very precarious contracts indeed, and many of which were stuck in the public and voluntary sector because of the racism in the employment practices in the private sector. So in the very places that are hit most strongly by the cuts by this government, those people are placed before the cuts hit. So, in relation to black women in particular, many black women face a situation where they are the sole earners in their families. So like 58% of Afro-Caribbean women are single-parent families, so it's devastating those families to lose jobs. And on this issue of unemployment figures for black and ethnic minority women, 1 in 5 black women are unemployed, where 1 in 14 white women are unemployed. So even when black women lose jobs, they find it triply hard to find jobs to replace them. There's been a number of studies that have taken place. All Parliamentary Group on Race and Community published a report last year where they talked about it. And in fact, in the black communities, Pakistani and Bangladeshi women fare even worse. 20.5% of them unemployed. So that's a shocking statistic, where we've got 6.8% of white women unemployed. I've already talked about where black women are concentrated, but there's some of the studies that have been done by not just organisations like the Working Lives Institute, but also our national unions. Unison, Unite have done studies as well, which have shown the impact on black women in particular. And one of the studies I wanted to mention was the Unison's Challenging Racism in the Workplace study, which was done in the Greater London piloted area, so all the boroughs of London. Of the boroughs, I think there's 31, I think it is, or something like that. Only 17 responded to the Freedom of Information request, but out of the 17 boroughs, in 12 boroughs, black women were disproportionately affected when it came to redundancies and reorganisations with losing their jobs. In one borough, in particular, black women constituted just 5% of the workforce, but 23% of the redundancies. In one council, black workers made up 31% of the workforce, so very healthy statistic there, they made up 31%, and 63% of the redundancies. So we're talking about, areas of our public services provided for our communities, which were provided by diverse communities themselves, being decimated. These workplaces, black people being stripped from these workplaces. So a heavy cost being paid by the black communities in the cuts. So I just wanted to kind of really echo that. It's been talked about a little bit in the workshop that I went to just before. And just to say that, as we all know as women, our earnings are crucial for family units. It says a lot when our earnings are depleted to this state, that people have to rely on food banks and the like, that our children can't have the right to free education, they can't decide which college to go to, that EMA is stripped from them. But these cuts are hitting, as everyone has talked about in the sessions that we've heard today, the poorest, hardest, and amongst that, the black community, the hardest still. Barac was set up in 2010, when we knew that this was coming and this was going to hit the black communities really hard, and that those communities need to organise with other communities, across the board. They need to join unions, join anti-cuts campaigning. So that was the point of Barac, was to heighten the activism amongst the black communities. So we went out, we organised rallies up and down the country, launched events in Manchester, Birmingham, in Leeds, in Bristol, in the black communities, to make them aware of the cuts that were coming. They may have been trying to fight them in small groups themselves, but trying to bring unity together, and unity and strength, and trying to organise. So amongst Barac organising groups now that have set up in those cities, we've got people in the trade unions, in community groups, service users, lawyers, 1990 Trust are helping us, other black organisations, and since we've been set up, we've been inundated with speaking at workshops and talking in campaign groups and whatever, and it shows that there is a thirst to know what's happening and how to engage with communities. And there was a little bit talked about how you can engage on the ground in the workshop I just went to just now, and I mentioned about how if you don't see black and migrant communities, immigrant communities coming to your events, then you need to bring your event to them. You need to talk about ways, ingenious ways of bringing your campaigning work into those communities and empowering people to own those campaigns. So, for example, going into race equality councils, talking to them, finding out what can they organise meetings of women in the communities, Roma women, Somali women, get together with groups of women, go to after-school clubs and talk to people. You know, you'll see people will be thirsty to tell you about their experiences of how they are trying to fight back against the cuts. And there was an inspiring group of women in East London, where I live in Newham. Focus E15 is an East Thames housing association property, supported housing for pregnant women, women with small children, small babies, and they're all being evicted from that property. Like wholesale, being said, if you want housing in the future, you'll have to go to Birmingham from East London, lose all their support networks. And these women are fighting. There's loads of people out there fighting in their communities, but it's giving them, it's building that network with people to bring them all together. And that's what Barac and other people are trying to do. So please, I urge you, if you're involved in any anti-cuts campaigning, any groups that you're involved in at the moment, that you really reach out to those communities and make sure that you give them the opportunity to have their voice heard. And, you know, when you go to talk to people, you don't tell them what you're doing. You can talk about what you're doing, but you ask them what they can do. You say, you know, you appreciate and value the context in which they can bring a break into the campaign. Because, I mean, we all appreciate multiculturalism and society and the richness of society, and that's part of it. Those people have a contribution to make as well with regards to campaigning. So that's kind of what we want to bring into this workshop. Thank you.